Well, perfect. I think we'll get started. So thanks everyone for calling in. Really appreciate everyone joining us virtual. Hopefully we'll be able to meet back up in person really soon. I know the virtual piece is difficult for the social, but we're making the best of the situation we have. So thanks everyone for calling in. Really looking forward to our chat today with Chuck. Before we do that, and while we let everyone else kind of filter in, Sam, do you have a market update for us?
I do. So actually super excited with these most recent numbers. So total number of active listings for the month of June is 5,427. So last month we had 5,378. And so, and when I'm saying total listings, this is pulling our entire Des Moines metro area. So all the little suburbs, we do have some that pull in from like Newton, but they're kind of a part of their own MLS. So sometimes they bounce back and forth between the two.
Sam, what would have been a year ago at this time?
A year ago at this time, we had 5,869 new listings. So
Okay,
we're down about 400, which isn't super concerning.
Okay, similar, very similar.
Considering we are in a global pandemic, I think these numbers are pretty strong.
Yeah, agreed.
So
that's largely on single family as well, right, Sam?
Correct, yes. Yep. So the numbers I'm focusing on are primarily single family units. We've had a pretty decent jump of new listings just in the month of June. We had 1,985, and Humphrey, last year we had 1,756 new listings. So that's a pretty decent increase in the number of new properties that are jumping on the market.
I missed, how many did you say now you just had? 1,000 and...
Yep, so for June of 2020, we have 1,985 new listings just in the month of June. Okay. And then last year, we had 1,756.
So slight inventory increase.
Yes.
Okay. All right, good.
And lastly, our average days to sell for June of 2020 is 52 days on the market, and that's from start to finish. So it's important to keep in mind, you know, standard closing time frame is about 45-ish days when it comes to using traditional lending. Last year, our average days to sell in the month of June was 58 days. So we've cut off, you know, a week, which is pretty good.
That's awesome. That shows some demand for the inventory that's out there.
Absolutely. And then, what happened? Our average price points of properties that have sold remained the same as last month. So our average sale price is $241,196, which is actually a slight increase from last year at this time. The month of June in 2019 had $2,380-ish. So we've increased a little bit in our average price points.
Awesome. Yeah, so we see increased demand. We are seeing some inventory creep up, which doesn't mean anything necessarily other than people are putting houses out there. And we are seeing prices still trickle upwards. Did I miss any takeaways there?
No, it's great. It's definitely, you know, we were all super nervous in March, right? Like we had no idea what in the world was going to go on in the real estate world. So to see these super strong numbers consistently over the last couple of months during a global pandemic, definitely is reassuring that the real estate market is still incredibly strong.
It sounds on par with a year ago at this time, all of those numbers.
Yeah, for sure.
And Sam, Gary posted in the comments that he'd love to see pull those data sometime in the MLS. So.
Oh, sweet, Gary. I'm gonna throw my email address on here. We can schedule a time to either Skype or Zoom or grab a coffee in person if you're comfortable with that.
That'd be awesome. I get people asking me that all the time, and I'm sure I could probably figure it out, but it might be a lot quicker if you show me.
For sure. Yeah, no problem.
Perfect. Well, cool. At this time, guys, I'd like to introduce Chuck. Chuck is our guest speaker for the evening. Chuck's got a background, so he graduated Drake in 1999 with a law degree. Is that right, Chuck?
That is correct.
And Chuck specializes in rebuilding abstracts as well as kind of those difficult closing scenarios. So a lot of REO work and everything else. Did I introduce you properly, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, those are the kindest words I've had said about me in a while, so absolutely.
Perfect. Tell us, what got you into law in the first place? What sparked that fire?
Well, I grew up in a small northwest Wisconsin town, about 2,000 people, in the summertime about 500,000 tourists. And in Wisconsin, you learn to walk, drink, and skate, and not necessarily that order. So those things kind of tend to cause interaction with, say, law enforcement people. And so at a young age, I rode my four-wheeler everywhere, got myself in a lot of trouble, and I figured out I was kind of interested in how the law worked to help myself, if nothing else.
There you go. I love that. That's the perfect way to spark a passion, right?
Absolutely.
Self-preservation and defense. I love it. Why real estate from all of that?
I honestly, I tried to think about that, and I cannot come up with a reason on real estate. My high school sweetheart and we had modest goals, and it was to live in Denver. Her sister lived there, so we were going to live in Denver, have kids, and I was going to practice law as a real estate attorney. And for the life of me, I cannot remember where that came from. I have no idea. I knew I always. Well, I always had a business background. My undergraduate was business, so while I started in the law for self-preservation and criminal defense, by the time I was going to law school, I always knew I kind of had an interest in transactional work over litigation. But my legal career actually started in litigation.
Okay.
But I was always kind of trying to steer myself towards real estate. And then in 2003, I had the opportunity to go work at Wasker, and that's where I kind of learned real estate.
Perfect. So you've got some background with Wasker, who is one of the larger, for everyone that's calling in, they are one of the larger, I call them transactional folks in town. Is that?
Oh yeah, they're by far the largest real estate firm in our state. I affectionately call them the puppy mill of title and closing. They're all good guys and gals over there. They do high transaction. I was very fortunate to land there. There really wasn't many scenarios that they hadn't seen. So it was always nice to be able to walk down the hall and ask questions. And usually somebody had saw what I was looking at and just couldn't wrap my hands around at that point. So I was pretty fortunate to be able to start my career there.
That's awesome, brother. Thanks for sharing that. So here's a random question for you. Attorney or lawyer, which is the preference? And is there a difference in law?
There's an inside joke. I'm not going to share it on that, but there are attorneys who like to call themselves doctor too, since we have a doctorate. I think it's if you have medical doctors in the family, you're more geared towards holding yourself out as a doctor. The attorney, I don't know, some people put Esquire after their name too. I've never really had a personal preference, never really thought that much about it, but I'm sure there are people in my profession who give it a great deal of thought.
So the summary is they're all the same blend.
They are. It's in different areas in the United States and globally. Someone practicing law may have very different names. Yeah, I think they're called barristers in some other countries, and it's everything, counselor to, there's all kinds of different names for it. But here in the U.S., it's pretty much anybody who's licensed by the state to practice law as attorney, lawyer, and each state has its own licensing law. So some states like Wisconsin, if you graduate from, say, Marquette, you're automatically able to practice law in Wisconsin. Your degree is,
Gotcha.
you don't have to sit for the bar exam.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was considering a move to that a few years ago. It kind of got beaten back by the people who went through the process of the bar exam, and I think they just sarcastically wanted every new attorney to have to do it because they did. But each state has, and then there are even states they have. I mean, this gets really in the weeds, but there are recognized law schools and not recognized law schools that are not accredited. So you could go to and they have entirely different pass rates on bar exams. So you could spend a lot of money going to a non-accredited law school, not learn anything, and end up having to take the bar a million times to become an attorney. It's just different state by state and each geographic location.
That makes sense. So you specialize in that real estate side, correct?
Yeah, it's probably 95% of my practice. In late 2006, I approached Wasker. I was seeing a trend, that was the refinance boom, and I was seeing a trend where we were having difficulty standardizing our refinance title. And a large component of that was the abstracting fee. And we had no control over it, and we had no control over the time it took. So our clients, wanted title yesterday, and we might wait 2 weeks for the abstractor to give us a search. So I went to the guys, at that time it was only guys, Zora wasn't it, Wasker, and so just the guys in real estate there. And I was like, look, I got this idea. I want to apply for my abstracting waiver and abstract. And they weren't really, it wasn't something that they saw that they were that interested in adding as a practice at Wasker, and that is ultimately why I left, so I could go out on my own and get my abstracting waiver. But
Gotcha.
I was the first attorney when I applied for it. I applied for a statewide waiver.
Nice.
Before me, the attorneys used to do this little wink-wink deal where they apply just in the county where they were at, and then they'd use this case that said you can't restrict an attorney geographically in the state on the practice of law. And so I decided to just blow up the system, and I went statewide, and I had 100 and some abstractors show up at my hearing, and I was Satan reincarnated. I mean, it was pretty wild. It was pretty contested, pretty heated, but I got my abstracting waiver, and so it allows me to prepare abstracts in any county in the state. So I'm able to offer people that standardized pricing, pretty standardized turnaround time. I mean, some counties are right now, some recorders' offices are closed from this COVID stuff. So it's a challenge at this point. But yeah, it allows a little more standardization, particularly with the rebuild abstracts that the national REO companies want.
That makes sense. So just so everyone's on the same page, can you run through, and we've got folks of every different educational level, so can you explain the difference between an abstract and what other states call title?
Sure. So here in Iowa, we are the last abstract and title opinion state in the country, and that's because we just know how to do it better. So an abstract in Iowa, we have a 40-year marketable title act. So in our state, you have to show a chain of title from a title holder at least 40 plus years to the current title holder. And you have to report all liens, encumbrances, and filings against the property. And that gets condensed into paper form, which is a paper abstract. Someday I hope we can get to a digital abstract and burn these things. But right now we still have paper abstracts. They're still legal size paper. Unless you're in Des Moines County, they're like the size of your pocketbook, if you can believe that. But yeah, so that's how we do it here. And then that abstract goes to an attorney. The attorney looks at the abstract and provides a title opinion. And then at that point, you can do one of two things in Iowa. Some people don't know, but you can insure transactions in Iowa with title insurance. You just cannot sell it or solicit the sale inside our borders, but you can order it from an outside the state title insurance company, or you can just go through the title guarantee program, or you can just rely on the attorney's errors and omissions, which is what most investors do. They don't spend the $140 for a title guarantee policy. A title insurance policy outside the state would probably start at just over $300 on most Iowa transactions. So the flip side of that, and what most other states do, there's some nuances to it, but most other states, the title insurance agent is actually a licensed insurance agent for the state, and they sell title insurance. They usually conduct their own search. Some states like South Dakota have a countersign requirement where the search be completed by an abstractor in the county, and then they countersign and can split the fee. It's a fee sharing statute, but for the most part, somebody does the search, and then you issue, as the insurance agent, you examine it, you render what you consider to be insurable title, and then you issue a policy on it and you quote a price.
Perfect.
And it's usually there's 3 or 4 pretty big insurance companies, and they make a lot of money usually.
And that just keeps you covered from any defects that might have gotten missed in the event that abstract forgot a lien, or that title or that attorney forgot to call one out, correct?
Correct. So, it's a kind of a level of what you're comfortable with. Like I tell people, my errors and omissions are around for as long as I'm around. I could die next week, and your insurance policy just died with me. Most attorneys' insurance policies are claims made policies. So, if you make your claim after the policy goes away, you're out of luck.
Gotcha.
Versus, title guarantee or a title insurance binder, that's as good as it's backed by the state in the aspect of title guarantee, or by the insurance company in the title insurance. A little more perpetuity to it.
That makes a ton of sense. So that's the front end of should be the front end of every transaction if you want to understand clear title, right? What's like, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, absolutely. Sometimes as a seller, like we sell deals on contract, and we know title's clear, and we don't want to incur the expense of the abstract update and the title opinion. Title opinion is usually a buyer expense, but the abstract update. And so a lot of times, if your buyer is not represented by an attorney, they won't request a title opinion. And you don't have to have a title opinion done to buy property in the state. So
that makes sense. So then that gets into kind of that warranty deed conversation, right? So, and this might be deeper in the weeds than we need to go in general, but there's a difference between special warranty and general warranty. Can you just do just a broad stroke on that?
Sure. So and this was how it was taught in old property law way back whenever. If you think of a piece of real estate as a bundle of sticks, that bundle of sticks represents all the different interests that you could possibly hold in a piece of real estate. Right to possess, right to lease, right to, whatever. Those bundles, each stick is in that big bundle of sticks. So your warranty deed basically warrants the entire bundle of sticks. It says, I will protect you from, for any claim that you might have. Now, a special warranty deed, in the simplest terms, is a warranty deed accepting something from some stick from the bundle of sticks. Now, usually you see a special warranty deed. Usually the situation would be a deed in satisfaction of a contract. Whereas a seller, you're only warranting up to the date you sign the contract, because the buyer may have done something to cloud up that title. So you're only warranting, for that limited period of time. Sometimes REO companies, they'll do a special warranty where they'll basically accept out any potential claims prior to their taking title. And then, the flip of that is the quitclaim deed, where the literal translation on that is whatever interest I have in the real estate you now own. So, you could quitclaim deed the old London Bridge joke, or, the beauty beachfront property down in the swamp in Florida. If you give a quitclaim deed, and you don't make any misrepresentations, you're not committing fraud. You're just saying whatever interest I have, here you go, have at it.
You're also not making any warranty with that. So you're not saying I paid off the mortgage. You're not saying that you have the right of possession. It's literally whatever it is.
Correct.
Yep. Makes a ton of sense. Thank you for that explanation. I think hopefully that was helpful for a handful of folks in the audience. And that kind of leads into a question that we had proposed prior to this to us from someone in the group. There's a big difference between foreclosure, sheriff sales, and tax sales. Can you give us just an overarching, like what each thing is and how they work together?
Sure. So I'm going to keep this with residential property because, a foreclosure on ag land in the state would take you 2 hours to walk through the process. So with residential stuff, you have a judicial foreclosure and a non-judicial foreclosure. A lot of people don't realize that, but non-judicial foreclosure works a lot like a contract forfeiture, but you can only utilize it on a non-homestead property. So most of your foreclosures, they're judicial in nature here in Iowa. You file your petition for foreclosure, you serve it on everybody, and then you either default or you get your judgment. Once you get your judgment, then you move to the sheriff's sale. Everybody gets notice again of the sheriff's sale, and you go down, you bid at the courthouse. They just resumed them this week on Tuesday, and they just had their second one today. So I think they're going to run them twice a week like they used to when they get bogged down until they get caught up on this, but because they've been closed for almost 3 months now. Yeah. So that's your foreclosure process. It's entirely judicial usually. There's other nuances.
Serving and the end is a sheriff's sale.
Correct. And you do have situations where the end isn't necessarily the sheriff's sale. There could be a right of redemption. There could be, you could get, that's one thing. If you're going to bid at sheriff's sale, make sure what you're buying. You might just be buying a certificate with the right to get a deed and not necessarily the sheriff's deed. So that's something you got to be careful of, because there are situations, if the IRS is a defendant and they haven't, waived some stuff in there, they may have a redemption right. The title holder, if they didn't waive redemption, if they're seeking a deficiency judgment, you might not get that property the day of the sheriff's sale. So,
right. How would one go about checking that? Would they call an attorney? Would they call a title company or an abstract company?
Abstract company do a title search. And as Mason just popped up on my screen, there have been a couple people in Polk County that have bought second mortgages and have lost a lot of money doing it. So, if you find yourself bidding on a $500,000 house and it's $100,000 mortgage, it's worth the $100 to find out if you're bidding on the first lien. I can't stress that enough, but you see it at least twice a year. Somebody loses their shirt buying a second mortgage, not realizing it.
For sure. And the surefire way, like Chuck's pointing out here, is definitely call that abstracting company, get that title search done. That's not the same as an abstract. That's not a full-blown abstract. There's not an attorney's review in there, but at least you'll understand kind of that current chain, right, Chuck?
Correct. When we do a title report, we do one of two product. We either do a one-owner search or a two-owner search, and that's literally what it is. From that either first owner or the second owner back current. We don't search anything before that. We don't, it's literally just a report saying here's who was in title, how they took title, here are the liens we've found. If they are like judgment liens and things like that, we will explain whether or not they've been listed as defendants in the foreclosure. But we don't search the foreclosure file to give you an opinion on whether or not there's proper service on them, or, so a title report is a nice, inexpensive way to get a snapshot at title. And it's basically what banks utilize on refinance title as well. is basically a deed forward search anyway. So it's a pretty inexpensive way if you see a property you like, to gauge, to make, you can't guarantee you're going to get clear title, but if it doesn't show up on that title report, most things in Iowa correct themselves after 10 years. So, there are things that last longer than that, but it happens. I'm not going to tell you it doesn't happen, but it's pretty rare.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's awesome. So then tax sales are completely different, and that whole deed process is totally different, correct?
Correct. So a tax sale, you attend the tax sale either over the internet in some counties, or you go down in person if they're going to have an in-person tax sale anymore. Hard to say. But you get assigned a number. They've changed it a lot over the years. Now it's one number per bidder. You can't go get
body. Yeah.
Physical body. You have to actually be a legal entity, so you can't do the OH 1 through OH 5,000 and put 5,000 numbers in the machine to get your numbers pulled. You can't do that anymore. It's one number per person, and so the property comes up. You decide if you're going to bid. You can bid down the interest in the property. It gets sold to you. All right, you pay what you bid, the tax sale. You then have a purchaser. You have a tax sale certificate. If that doesn't get redeemed in 1 year and 9 months, you can file a 90-day, or serve, you don't file it, you serve a 90-day notice of right of redemption on the people that you statutorily have to serve. And then after that 90 days, if they don't redeem that tax sale, you go into the county treasurer's office with your certificate, which a certificate is assignable, and whomever's the holder on the certificate goes in there with their proofs of service on the notice of redemption, and you get a tax sale deed.
Yeah, and so we buy a lot of tax sale deeds from those certificate holders. I'll just share that with everyone. And right now, my understanding is we can't file those deeds or give those service notices because of some of the state extensions. Are you familiar with that, Chuck?
My understanding is Jim Nervig either is going to or has filed an action. He's talked about it, I know. I don't think it's constitutional. I mean, some of the stuff that's happening right now, I just, I don't understand where the power that's being grabbed is coming from. I mean, you're going to get a bit of a political rant out of me, but I don't understand some of this stuff that, I mean, the interference with the ability to privately contract and the suspending of laws. I mean, some of this stuff really doesn't make sense to me. But right now, it's just like the sheriff sales. No more sheriff sales. Well, how is that possible? I mean, how does that happen? I don't understand. But yeah, right now, I think it's back on, but you couldn't collect interest. So those 3 months or 4 months or whatever, your tax sale certificate accrued no interest. You're just out. You got no time. You got no interest. So I think Jim's going to fight it. I know he's talked about it. And for those of you who don't know, Jim Nervig literally wrote the current tax sale law. I mean, he's on the sub-council with me, and he wrote it. And so my money's on him if he does fight it. But I don't know. I mean, it would cost a lot of money to fight this thing all the way. It's going to have to go all the way up to the Iowa Supreme Court.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting ball of worms. Thanks for opening that can with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. No, I don't think they can do what they've done, but they've done it. And so the question is, if no one objects to it or finds the judicial body that'll say, well, you can't do that, well, then you can do it, I guess. So.
Yep. It's like you can always write it in the contract. It doesn't mean it's enforceable.
Exactly. Careful if it's a lease, though, because that might get you in trouble.
Right. So, okay, kind of on that same topic. So you mentioned that certificates are assignable. So people could reach out to those certificate holders and try to acquire them, correct?
Correct. There is a market for that. I mean, most people though, I mean, you're going to pay a premium for it, so you're kind of exposed, because if you pay the premium for the certificate and a week later the person comes in and redeems the taxes, you just lost whatever you paid for the premium.
Yep.
But you know, most of tax sale bidders, it's an investment vehicle. You know, honestly, the rate of return is in and of itself enough for most of the tax sale bidders. That's why they do it. And then they get the home runs every now and then with the properties that slip through the cracks. So
For sure.
it's hard to find somebody willing to play ball to sell a certificate holder.
Yeah. And the easiest way to get in touch with those certificate holders would be to track down the physical holders or bidders. And the only way that I'm aware of doing that is through networking and Treasurer's office, correct?
Treasurer's office has, I know they maintain the list of all the bidders. I don't know if they have a list of all current tax sales. Somebody might know that better than I. My guess is they have that data available.
They would share it well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's acquirable, but it's not very well shared. I will venture that. So on the foreclosure side, is there any value in contacting the attorney that's handling that foreclosure?
Pretty minimal. You know, I mean, most foreclosure attorneys, they don't get paid anything extra for trying to put you in contact with the bank to buy the deal. You know, I mean, there's not a lot of incentive. You're not a party to the suit, so even if you gave them a purchase agreement, there's no ethical requirement that they tender that to their client. If you're lucky, the foreclosure attorney might give you an inside track to talk to somebody, but my experience, and I mean, I've bought a lot of real estate too. I've tried it, even when it makes sense, even when you want to pay the bank everything they're owed just to get an assignment of their note. I don't know if it's tax reasons or why, but you know, nothing hurts. So you're only out your time, but is it going to get you anywhere? Probably not.
Right. We have a similar mindset in our opinion. And this question came in from inside the group, so I wanted to get it answered directly from you. But from the investing side, we find that it's usually easier to get in touch with the buyer, or the current holder. Reach out to them, because the bank, generally speaking, won't give you any information anyway.
Exactly. The only exception to this might be the smaller Iowa bank, where their attorney is literally, you know, their corporate attorney and everything, and actually does have an interest helping his client out.
Yep.
That situation, you might have an inroad there, you know, especially if you want to negotiate a price before they even get it back or something. So, yeah, I could see that scenario, but your Bank of Americas and your Wells Fargos and, you know, when Davis or Petosa or Brown, you know, it's just, you're charging windmills. If you think that's going to be a viable profit center for you, I don't see it.
Yeah, it takes a lot of bottles of wine and whiskey to get anyone to help you out over there. And then
Absolutely.
what they can help you out with does not get you very far. So
Yeah, even try something as simple as asking for an account number on a mortgage, because you actually were in contact with the individual, but they haven't received a statement for, say, a year. So they have no idea what their account number is, and you can't get a payoff. They can't get a payoff even when they call if they don't have their account number. Try to get that from a foreclosure attorney. It's tough.
Yep. I love it. Thanks for those answers, Chuck. I really appreciate it. Has COVID affected any of your usual processings?
On the abstracting side, absolutely. You know, to get into these courthouses and recorder's office, a lot of them, even if they weren't closed, you had to make an appointment. And so, yeah, I mean, on the abstracting rebuild on these counties that have been closed, I mean, Dallas County, for example, for a while they wouldn't let anybody in the recorder's office except the 2 local abstractors. Well, that makes things a bit challenging, right? So, yeah, I mean, on the abstracting side, absolutely. Personally, in the office, I mean, I know Wasker's closing in cars and stuff, and I haven't done that. I still close. I mean, I still shake hands. I'm not in a risk group. I ask the people if I come into the room and the people are wearing a mask, I ask them if they want me to wear a mask or if they're comfortable. If I don't have a problem wearing a mask. I just don't usually wear it during a closing. It's hard, it's harder to hear an individual clearly when, and it fogs the glasses. So I don't normally wear it. But that's about the only thing that's changed here. But in my office, I don't have elderly staff. I don't have, there's a lot of there's a lot of considerations that a firm like Wasker has that I don't have. So it hasn't impacted my process on the closing side that much.
Procedurally, from the investor side, the biggest hurdle that I'm hearing is potential delays that could happen as a result.
Absolutely. I mean, that's to be expected. I think the good news, though, is, in my opinion, for the investors out there, there is a pent-up supply that's coming. I mean, people that are late on their mortgage now, that were late on their mortgage 3 months ago, I mean, this stuff, it's just been dammed up. And there's going to come a point, I saw it, I lived it through the last bubble burst, and there just comes a point where the banks just say F it, and they just open up the floodgates and they foreclose on everything. And it's coming. I mean, it is coming. And I do believe the commercial will follow the residential. There'll be a slight lag there, and then you'll see the farmland again. I think it's just a cycle that is going to repeat itself here.
For sure. No, and that makes total sense. So what action will Intel, like if you were to say, hey, this is what I would start doing, would it be waiting? Would it be subject to type stuff, or would it be wholesaling type activities?
Well, we do it all. My partner and I, if there's money to be had on a deal, we'll do the deal. Whether, we'll buy a rental, we'll sell on contract, we'll buy subject to, we'll buy from wholesalers. We don't discriminate. So I don't, if you make $1 today versus wait to make $1 tomorrow, or even, $1.25, I'll make $1 today and I'll try to make the $1.25 tomorrow. It's my mindset. I try to leverage yourself within reason. I mean, we've had a history of people over leveraging, and, when the rubber meets the road, they end up losing their portfolio, and then you're bidding on their portfolio. So my advice, just having lived through the last one and seeing what's coming on this one, is try to position your long-term holds. If you can do subject to deals, I mean, they're great. It's somebody else's money. So I think the subject to market is a market that a lot of investors that you're going to see a huge opportunity, I believe, is a subject to market.
How do people do that legally? What are the check boxes that they need to be hitting to make that work?
Yeah, so on your typical subject to deal, for anyone who doesn't know, you're buying the asset for minimal money and unofficially assuming the owner's loan. Pitfalls with that is, the minute you do that, you've technically triggered the acceleration clause in every mortgage that there is. Now, lenders don't want to take back performing assets. So to legally do it, you really don't have to do anything other than take the deed and then whatever your agreement is with the seller to make the payment. Now, most times, from the position of the investor that's doing that, you don't make any representations that you're guaranteeing you're going to pay their loan forever, right? I mean, and most of the subject to people have a disclaimer that, pretty much says, there may come a time I just walk away from this, and this is ultimately still your responsibility. So this is one of those where, who am I representing is how I answer this question. When I represent the sellers and they call me in, I'm like, well, first off, that's not the best idea in the world. As a seller, do you have any other option? If you're going to do it, make sure you get some reversionary language in the deed, so that if they default, you've got a right to get that asset back into your name because it's your loan. So, you know, it kind of depends who I'm representing, but to do it legally on a subject to, you don't have to do anything.
Gotcha.
You know, just
Hey, Chuck. Hey,
Yeah.
Chuck, this is Humphrey. I have a question about a second ago. You said that the big supply is coming and you think the dam is about to burst. What's your evidence, or do you have any, or reasoning to think that this big supply, this dam is about to burst?
Article published, I believe earlier this week, it was either the weekend or earlier this week, indicated that 35% of all mortgages are at least 30 days late right now. And we haven't seen a number like that since 2007. The federal government can't give enough money, and honestly, if it puts another $1,000 in people's pocket who haven't paid their mortgage, they're not going to pay their mortgage. They're already down on the mortgage, and everyone in the hotel or service industry, bar and restaurant right now that isn't working, they have a limited skill set of other jobs that they can go do, which is most of the time work in the hotel, restaurant, or bar industry at some other hotel, restaurant, or bar. Well, those are all closed too. So you have unemployment claims went up again here in Iowa. You know, I don't, you know, you can't drive down the street anymore and not see a restaurant that you're like, I can't believe they couldn't reopen. You drive by Applebee's, they're closed. You're like, wow, you know. So yeah, I just think that the combination of factors and the feeling from the last time. I mean, just to be clear, before COVID came along, in my opinion, we were on the front end of a bubble anyway. The data that was coming out, I mean, there's some strong national economic numbers. But inside the households, you know, most of your first-time home buyers today, if they're a husband and a wife, one of them went to college, and they're sitting with $50,000. I think the average, I think it was $57,000. I think was the number I saw as the average student loan debt in maybe first-time home buyer or married household or something like that. But anyway, think of the first house you bought. First house I bought was $79,000. I mean, these kids are carrying a mortgage payment before they go carry a mortgage. You know, that's terrible footing to be on to start your life. And then you add economic things like this, and more businesses are going to start working from home. I believe salaries are going to go down as a result. I mean, I think everything points to this, that this is good, that at some point, something has to give.
All these people not being able to pay or willing to pay their mortgage, the banks are going to start foreclosing and people are going to start selling. Like a cascading effect, one thing after another is what it sounds like.
Yeah, and the thing with if you were investing in 2008, you know, you drove down the street and 2 out of every 3 houses had a for sale sign in the front yard. You know, I mean, people wanting to sell, and you have equity. Yeah, you have equity in your house, but what does it matter? You can't tap it, you can't sell it, and you have no income to make your payment. So, I mean, I just think I think that we are on the front end of a bubble. Economically, first-time home buyers are in the worst economic position that they've been in their lives with student loan debt, and this is just a stressor that. I mean, I'd like to be wrong. I mean, I hope, but
I think you might be right. Hey, Samantha, are you seeing anything that leads you into similar conclusions? Samantha?
Okay, say that again.
I said, Samantha, are you seeing anything that leads you to a similar line of reasoning?
I mean, at this moment, based off of our statistics, I wish I had a crystal ball and I could say what's going to happen in the future. Based off of what I'm seeing right now, people are still buying at a rapid rate. Properties are still selling in 1 to 2 days on the market. I have not seen a major shift in that. But actually,
huge supply.
one question that I have for you, Chuck, I heard you say that 35% of people are 30-ish days past due on their mortgage. Would you say that a portion of this comes into play from kind of like a don't ask, don't tell? So these folks that saw, hey, I can take a forbearance on my mortgage, which means I don't have to pay. I'm going to collect all this extra unemployment. I'm going to get this stimulus check, not apply it to my mortgage, and not knowing that a forbearance means at the end of that time, everything comes due.
I think that actually makes that number more alarming, Sam, because the forbearance, people in forbearance right now from COVID, they're not reporting late. That mortgage forbearance, you don't owe the payment. It gets thrown onto the back of your loan, and it doesn't report on your credit as a late. So I think that's why I say I think some of the stuff that I'm seeing, and I don't want to put a damper on the real estate market as it is right now, because if any property under 100,000 that hits the market right now has 4 offers by the end of the first day, and is selling for at or above list. So yeah, I mean, the market out there right now is really strong, but here's the rub. Here's how 08 worked, right? In 08, the properties under 150,000 kept selling. It was the builders that were the first that, you couldn't, all of a sudden they couldn't sell these $200,000+ houses. You couldn't move the spec home. I believe you're starting to see more of those linger on the market a little longer. Now, not a lot. I mean, it's not a noticeable thing, but when that upward mobility stops in the real estate market is when it all starts tumbling down, because that's the person's got to buy that new construction. When the $200,000 house now is a $300,000 house. But, that's the trickle down. So the move up mobility, when that ceases, or when that person stops buying that new $300,000 house, that's when everything compresses back. And that's where you want to be sitting on a chair at that time.
And there's 2 important pieces here that we haven't covered in relation to that supply. So we had that stay on sheriff's sale, the end of that foreclosure process. So no matter what, there is a bottleneck that's been created over the last handful of months that will put an extra amount of supply on the market. Correct, Chuck?
Absolutely. And I look at the sheriff's sale religiously. We just bought a property Tuesday. Before COVID hit, before they suspended the sales, there were 6 pages on the Polk County Sheriff's Viewer of scheduled foreclosure sheriff's sale. These are just the sheriff sales that have already worked themselves through the system. Yep. There were 6 pages, 5 and 5.5 about. Right now, when you get on it, there's 2 pages. So those other 3.5 pages, they just haven't been scheduled for sheriff's sale yet, because the banks are still, slow to come out of this COVID thing, and they've got employees all over in these houses. They can't formulate a plan yet on their inventory, and then they're looking at all the new lates and all the new, and I think these banks are trying to internalize, what do we want to do? And if nothing else, there's the sheriff sales that had worked their way through the system. There were pages of them, they haven't been scheduled yet. So there's at some point this stuff has to come through the system. It has to.
And from the buyer side, we see that, we look at that, and we can feel that. I mean, a lot of our motivators have shifted, right? So a lot of our motivators working directly with owners have changed substantially. I can give you a perfect example. We had a handful of acquisitions that were facing sheriff sale before COVID hit, and frankly, when they canceled those sales, they're like, "Hey, I think I can stay here for a couple more months without much issue." Like, you're absolutely right. That is, that is the best solution for you. So we will just hang out and wait.
There should be a wholesalers and a subject to paradise out there in a little bit, when people finally realize, I've stretched this as long as I can. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Mitch. I mean, and there were a couple leads, we were working on, and it was that exact same scenario. They were ready to sell, and then all of a sudden, oh, well, I don't have a sheriff's sale next month anymore.
Yep.
I just lost my motivation to sell.
Yep. Yeah, and we're not the twist your arm type. So, hey, that's the best solution. We'll wait it out. We'll be here when you're ready.
Absolutely.
That's fun. That's fun. Mason, did you have a comment, buddy? I saw your hand go up earlier.
Yeah, well, I was one. Is my mic on? I don't know. Can you guys
you're
hear?
on.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're good, boss.
More of like an ideas, I guess, wanted to bounce off Chuck with this certain topic. This is something I'm like extremely passionate about because I feel like it has something more to do with economic standpoint of it. But like, so obviously the demand is extremely high still, and home values are still rising. And Chuck, I think you're spot on with whatever with what you're saying about. We've talked about it before. Like, there's going to be a bloodbath out here soon. I think there's going to be a crash like we haven't seen before, and I think it's from these artificially low interest rates that we just keep getting lower and lower, and you can't go any lower really. And just it's the policy standpoint. I think that's just it's gonna hit, crap's gonna hit the fan.
Well, and if you go back again, history repeats itself. If you go back to 2008, we had the exact same scenario. Interest rates bottomed out. I mean, everybody who could refinance and position themselves, they weathered the storm. So yeah, the economic factors on almost every level, to me, it feels pretty similar to what the front end we were going into.
Yeah, and me personally, I mean, people could disagree with me, but like I feel like it's not a good time to buy at all if you're going to be like a first-time home buyer, because what's it matter if you lock in a great rate when your house that you just bought for $300,000 is worth $100,000 in a year or two from a huge crash.
There's a trickle down in there, but I do believe that's going to be area specific, and that's why it's important to watch current trends, because if you compare our market right now to Southern California, those numbers do not look the same. The number of house sales do not look the same. They're not holding steady over the years. In thinking about Des Moines specifically, last crash time, there wasn't a massive compression in that mid-range price point. Correct, Chuck?
That's correct. That's why I say most noticeably, I mean, it was, well, in a lot of ways, the difference with this time and the last time is, like I was saying, your lower income earners, not necessarily your first time home buyers, but the people that work in the bars and the restaurants, they're the ones this time that don't have the jobs. Last time it was the middle managers that were losing their jobs left and right, that were in that higher price point. So part of me thinks that this might be a little different, how it rips through the inventory that you see out there. But yeah, you're right. There were different price points last time. Last time the hardest hit were your dual income earner in the new construction house they just bought with no 0 to 3% invested in it. And a new house is like a new car anyway. And the minute you drive it off the lot, you're upside down on it if you don't put any money down on it. And, they were unable to make their payments, and they didn't have any equity position. They had no skin in the game, 100% financing, all kinds of stuff. And a lot of those programs have come back to some degree. So
I really want to point out what was important in there. A lot of people don't realize this small tidbit. New construction historically does not hold value outside of that development time frame. Those tax abatements come off. Those last few lots that get built go for a lower rate. So your appraisals adjust, your sales points adjust, or the continued phasing of those developments. Now you're comparing brand new houses with things that were built 3 years ago. So you see some price compression as well. So that's a really important point. New houses are very similar to new cars. The opposite of that are established neighborhoods with established valuations hold a lot steadier. It's like a classic car. Those don't typically go down in a decent market. They will go down. Everything goes down to some degree, but those won't drop nearly as fast as new construction when you have those other conditions coming off.
And from an investor standpoint, if you're in the lower price point, you have more flexibility with what you do with the asset, right? I mean, the people that lose the houses still have to live in a house. It just means they become renters, which is what happened last time.
Yep.
Or a contract, if you don't make a mortgage payment for 10 months to a year, hopefully they've squirreled a little money away for a down payment on a contract. So, there's opportunities there as an investor depending on the price point. But I'm curious, did anybody go to the sheriff's sale today? Because to use the example on the new construction, there was a house in Ankeny that was a $612,000 build by Classic Builders that was up with a foreclosure judgment, I think like $520. And I'm curious what it sold for if anyone went today.
Too rich for my blood. I saw it on there, and I think Russ was down there, but I have not talked to him today.
But yeah, new houses they're nice, but yeah, I mean, they're like a new car in my opinion.
Awesome. Is there any other questions from the audience? We have a few other questions that we'd like to get through, but I definitely want to capture audience questions.
Yeah, this is Tina. I was just wondering with where we're talking about like a market crash with the housing, the Des Moines area, Midwest, I mean, I think a big problem was the inflation of prices of those homes where they were purchased for way more than what they were really worth. And I don't think that's really happening around here. Do you? I mean, that's what you're kind of saying, that the prices are pretty stable, but I don't think homes are extremely overflated in price. Are they?
It's all perspective.
Yeah, the stuff we've been selling over the last year is selling a lot stronger than it did the year before. I mean, there's a run up right now. I mean, it's a seller's market in that price point. 150 and down, it is a seller's market.
Yeah,
so
it's definitely perspective. I mean, and it also, the Midwest is still a pretty broad stroke, right? So if we use Des Moines Metro as an example, start comparing your dollars per square foot from the different communities, and you'll see where the inflation's at. In some areas you're at $2.25 a square foot. In some areas you're at $100 a square foot. Those are very different, and there's reasons for that difference. Don't get me wrong. There's amenities of the area. There's school districts. There's all of those things. But the important point there is, depending on the input strategy or the output strategy, right? You can adjust for those dollars per square foot and make sure you're not overinflating your acquisitions or your votes. So don't go to the west side and expect to buy a house for $100 a square foot. That's not going to happen. But certainly, near central downtown Des Moines, those you'll get in those price range, and those aren't going to compress nearly as much because they don't have the room to move. There's still a base living need inside of housing. Those can't compress as much. But your 225s out of Milwaukee, those can fall.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. If we could expect anything to fall around here, and I hadn't really checked the sheriff's sales because I didn't think anything was really going on around here. But if I look on auction.com or some of those auction websites, I'm not really seeing much at all around the Dallas County area. So are those fairly in sync with what we'd see on a sheriff's sale, or are those outside of what's on a sheriff's sale?
Those auction websites, I mean, every now and then there's a good deal that comes through, and then 5 of us are bidding on it that, are probably on this conference right now. But, just back to the inflation comment, inflation works in other ways too. And we are seeing inflation run up in consumer goods. I mean, look at the cost of hamburger and milk and, so when you have the run up in consumer goods, that decreases the disposable income and it makes it harder to make a mortgage payment. So, inflation works all kinds of different ways to impact the housing market that we might not think of, as we just sit there and talk about inflation. But yeah, I mean, the auction websites, the other problem with the auction websites right now are the same turds have sat on there for 3 months and there's no new inventory. I mean, that's, it just, because there's nothing that came out of sheriff's sales. So you're looking at properties that haven't sold that have been listed on there, some of them way over a year.
Yeah.
And they don't drop and I've actually I bought properties on auction sites. I've actually talked to the people that run, I think it was auction.com or it may have been Hubzu. I forget which, but And what they told me is some of these companies have reclaiming, just call it a reclaiming insurance contract with, Fannie or Freddie or something. They're basically guaranteed, the bank is guaranteed to get paid X dollars on an asset.
Yep.
So they put them out there on the auction site, but they don't lower their reserve because they're guaranteed to get that on their insurance payout. And so the asset sits there and sits there and sits there. So you have a lot of that on the auction sites.
And those auction
Okay.
sites are
To me,
very-
like
that's
we're
good to know.
probably in the front end of it.
Go ahead.
I was saying that it sounds to me like, from what everyone said, it sounds like we're in the very front edge or near the front edge of this thing. It just hasn't quite imploded yet. We still might be months away from everything falling apart.
The direct answer to that is time will tell, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that also depends on whether or not things just continue to reopen? I talked to a gal today who works at, the hospital admissions, and she was saying, we're seeing some cases, but they haven't been as serious, and it's dropping. And so as that goes down, as we hit our peak and those things start to drop, things will start to reopen. I'm seeing things really doing well around Iowa. Some of the other states, not so much. But if we start kicking it into gear again, maybe there were some smart people out there and they actually saved that stimulus check because they were still bringing in some unemployment on top of that. Who knows?
So, okay, I wasn't around Iowa in 2008. I was in Illinois, and it was terrible there. However, I'm often hearing that the metro was super insulated from, the massive bubble that took down tons of other areas. Do you think that's still the case?
I personally do. I think Des Moines Metro specifically is fairly insulated. Again, we start to get into those suburbs, and I'll disagree with the insulation a little bit, largely because of that new construction piece again, right? We're seeing that spread there. That's my opinion. I was in Chicagoland for the 08 components, and we were very heavily involved with the development pieces at that time. And I can tell you it was a necessary pivot to move from tract building developments, which we were doing, into rehabbing properties in existing neighborhoods. Still very able to pull values, still. And really, it's funny that HubZoo came up because that was our primary lead source. We were actively lead genning at that time, fully licensed brokerage. We were handling a ton of the foreclosures coming through at that point in time from a disposition standpoint on the broker level. But our main lead source at that point in time was HubZoo. So it changes based on area. I mean, at any given time in 08, you'd see 30 to 40 properties in a city for that. And the reason for that was easy to sell for the bank. What we found was there was a bit of process, like Chuck was saying, that they didn't always sell because there was a guaranteed minimum for them. So Des Moines Metro, think insulated, personal opinion. We've got a lot of assets here, so there might be some bias in that rosy picture, right? But
the financial profile of your Midwestern person is a little, people live a little different here in the Midwest. You actually do put away money when you can for a rainy day. You try to bear through stuff. So I think all that plays into it a little bit. We're insulated to some degree, but in 08, a lot of the layoffs, like when Wells Fargo was cutting staff, it wasn't a lot of staff in town. It was a lot of staff in Minneapolis and a lot of staff in Arizona that got laid off. And so some of the big employers in town, the insurance company and the banks that we have here, didn't lay off a ton of people, not right away. I mean, Wells Fargo had some pretty drastic layoffs during that time, but not, it was kind of graduated, not really all at once. So, I mean, I don't want to preach gloom and doom. And I agree if things continue to reopen, but part of it, if you go out in a restaurant right now, yeah, they're open, but their lunch crowd it's not even half of what it was before because that's all that can sit in there.
Yep.
It's lucky if it's a third of what it was before. I mean, how many of these restaurants can continue to stay open based on carry out and a third of the people coming in to dine. I mean, anybody who's been in the restaurant business knows your cream is your beverage sales, your liquor sales. I mean, that's where you make your greatest profit and everything. Food, a lot of times your specials or even loss leaders. I mean, that's not real estate related, but you get, I mean, how long can some of these places stay open? I don't know. I mean, I hope we rebound.
There's a few restaurants that I'm hoping open back up that I don't think are, but well, the personal selfishness on some of them. There was a couple places I didn't get to try that I'm like, oh, next time. Any other group questions? Feel free, if you guys don't feel comfortable talking, write them in the chat. Call them out for you. Anything on Facebook?
Well, I mean, I guess it goes back to the subject to stuff, Chuck. I think, I guess it's not really a question, but I guess it's more of an opinion. I think a subject to is a great way for deals that have zero to little equity in them for investors to be able to make a deal cash flow really well.
Absolutely. I mean, just, I don't have any problem sharing, how we do it. It's not like we've invented the wheel here, but you get your distressed seller, that's 6 to 12 months behind on their mortgage, but their property's in pretty decent shape, and you don't have to come out of pocket a lot on rehabbing it. Well, if you can get $7,500, $10,000 catches up their mortgage, and you can get it reinstated, and then you can find a contract buyer who can give you $500 to $7,500 down. You've insulated yourself from risk. You have minimal skin in the game. Yeah, there might not be a ton of equity in the property, but you're looking at a break even of like 6 or 7 payments. I've bet a lot more on stupid football games. So, I think subject to is really, you're playing with other people's money. They're buying it as a homestead, so you're getting a cheaper interest rate. Usually, I mean, if they don't have a ton of equity, there might be mortgage insurance and stuff that really skews the rate. But for the most part, it's cheaper money than what you can get as an investor. Certainly cheaper than a hard money lender is going to give you. So it's an opportunity. It definitely is an opportunity. And those people, if they've already committed to walking on the house and the loan, well, here's a few $100. You want to sign this deed? Sure. So it's motivated sellers. It's not a hard sell, and it's not hard to make a decent return at it.
Yeah.
So, Chuck, we've heard horror stories of these subject twos where the bank catches wind of it and all of a sudden they call the note due. I've heard quite a few of those horror stories. How, in this current situation, how relevant, I guess, would you say that past data would be?
Well, so in my entire lifetime, I've heard of 2 notes being called. One was a small town bank. The guy took out a home. He was going to live in it, new construction. And then he told the bank he wanted to sell it on contract. And the bank told him, you need to refinance to do that. We gave you a sweetheart home rate. And he thumbed his nose at the bank, sold it on contract. And they said, F you, and called the note due. The other one, which is a little stranger, was a performing note from some people that stopped into my office asking what their options were, and it was a Fannie deal that they had just rented. No, they sold it on contract. And Fannie actually accelerated the note, and it wasn't even an investor or subject to deal. So those are the 2 I've heard of. Now I've heard some horror stories with people that do a subject to deal, and you get the seller who sees what you resell their property for and thinks that you just pocketed thousands and thousands of dollars, which you probably didn't do, but they think you pocketed thousands. And then they're like, well, we want our mortgage paid. And so if we're going to start calling our lender and telling them that you own this house now, and we're going to force the note to get called. I've heard of that. Most of the guys that invest heavy in subject to deals, the disclaimer and what's in there, they basically contractually prohibit those sellers in a subject to deal from doing that. But yeah, could they do it anyway? Yeah, I mean, they could call up their lender and be like, "Hey, I sold this house. You know, what are you gonna do about it?" Or be a jerk on the phone. And
Sure.
so my advice is, if it's a really good deal that you're going to sell on contract, I mean, you should always have a reserve pool that you can go tap if you're going to play in the subject to deal. So if it's not that great a deal, you can walk away from it, so long as you disclose to the contract buyer, the situation and everything. You can walk away from it, or you tap your pool and you just take out the loan, and then you go refinance the contract. There are banks that'll loan up to 75% of the balance on a contract, if the lesser of that, or 80% of the LTV. So there are traditional lenders out there that you can tap for money, or if you have to, you bite the bullet and go find some private money at 12% or something.
So kind of what I'm hearing you say is, if you are going to gamble, which I'm not a gambler, I'll just preface with that. If you are going to gamble on the subject twos, at least be in a financial position to be able to have, what we call your plan B or your backdoor policy, to where you could go and get that traditional lending in the event that, seller feels some sort of way.
And that's my advice on like every investment. I mean, every things change. If you find your property sitting on the MLS for 3 months and you can't get but a showing, every 3 weeks, I mean, you either got to drop the price, or if you're too much into it, you got to go to plan B on a contract sale or rental. I mean, yeah. So the subject to people, yeah, I mean, you can, and this is my general legal advice to people as well: disclose everything. It protects you it insulates you from any kind of lawsuits or backlash. So disclose everything to everyone, make everyone aware of the situation. And but if you're going to do a subject to, I mean, you got to understand, the minute the deed hits the recorder's office, you've caused the bank to have the right to accelerate the debt and foreclose on it. There's no defense to it. It's black letter in every mortgage.
One of the second houses that I sold, it was a former personal house of mine. I sold on contract. Note got called due 3 months after I sold on contract. Not a joke. Yeah.
Crazy. I've got 2 houses out that I had traditional lending on that have been sold on contract for years, and they've never said anything. But yeah. I mean, it happens.
It goes, like you said, that was a small bank. So that was John Deere Credit Union. I'll just share that. So that was a small bank. They found out about it straight away and got the call. We were able to just pay it off. It wasn't a big deal, but it was still a surprise. So that's where that contingency really comes into practice. And that's just solid investing advice in general. Make sure that you always have a backup plan. Plan A doesn't always work out. So just, and the disclosure component that you said, Chuck, that if you're not fully disclosing everything, there's probably something you're doing wrong. If you haven't built that credibility with your seller or your buyer, what you got to ask yourself, what am I doing that I'm worried about?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That goes without saying. If you feel uncomfortable telling someone something about that transaction, you may want to reassess the transaction as a whole.
Yeah. We literally, and this is there's no secrets in real estate, right? It's not a thing. So inside of our contracts, we literally write, we have the intent of profiting on this transaction. Make them sign it. I don't know if Neil's on, but I love Neil's contract. I will make huge money, ! And he's got an initial line by it. I mean, that's, yep.
Yeah, I mean, that, and you can tell the people while you're sitting down with them, if I wasn't going to make money on this transaction, I wouldn't be here in your living room signing this up. Exactly. I mean, I'm going to make money, but I'm going to treat you fair, and what I tell you I'm going to do and follow through with. And I mean, to me, that's the only way to do business. So yeah,
absolutely. I like telling people the court of public opinion hurts me a lot more than it hurts you.
Yeah.
What did you say, Mitch?
I like telling people that the court of public opinion hurts me a lot more than it could ever hurt them. So I will always treat them with good business.
I got you.
I saw a question up there about holding the deed and not recording it on a subject to deal. I mean, you can do that, but understand that any judgments that pop against that person that probably doesn't pay a lot of people that just lost the house to you, they attach as a lien because they're still in title. If they have federal liens, if they don't pay their taxes, those can get recorded. And if they beat your deed, there's a presumption that a conveyance occurs upon the date on the deed and delivery. I mean, you could do an affidavit and try to convince a title examiner that no, I really did have the deed given to me, several months ago, and that stuff doesn't attach to title. But I wouldn't pass on it. Whatever gets to the recorder's office first. We're a race notice state, so you hold a deed in your pocket, you run the risk of all kinds of trouble attaching that real estate.
You also run the risk of someone else reselling that property, correct?
Well, that's part of it too. I mean, another investor comes in and gets their deed, and they record their deed. Hey, why'd you sell my house on contract? I mean, yeah, we're race notice. So, yeah, you can pocket a deed, absolutely. In theory, the bank would never find out to trigger the acceleration clause, but you got all kinds of other issues that you could be dealing with too. So
I'd rather face the beast that's known and deal with the acceleration if I'm going down that route.
Well, and I had one investor tell me the other day that he was on the front end of an acceleration on a subject to deal, and he called the bank and he just asked to speak to a manager till he got somebody that was intelligent enough to understand it. And he just explained the scenario that he bought the property, wants to keep the mortgage on there, he's got somebody in there, he's going to make payments and everything. And the last I heard, the manager was going to kick it up the chain to stop the acceleration. So banks, in the end, most banks don't want assets back. They don't. So, and especially as defaults increase, banks really don't want.
How does that look if the mortgage holder dies?
Well, most times if it's a performing note, they don't trigger the acceleration clause, because they assume that if there are payments being made, it's a family member or something, and they're trying to work it out. The last thing the bank wants is a PR of foreclosing on deceased mom's or dad's house. So typically, if it's a performing asset, they won't, even in the instance of death. I've heard of banks and subject to deals where you can get in there and still go through the estate and get your deed and everything, and the banks they don't call them due. That's why it's so unusual when a note's accelerated. It is truly the exception, to the rule.
Good to know. Thanks for sharing that, Chuck. Are there any other questions in the audience? I want to respect Chuck's time. I know I told you it was only going to be an hour, so I apologize we went over, Chuck.
Oh, no, I don't mind. Fire away.
Any other questions in the group, guys?
Any other legal issues we should watch out for that you'd recommend, Chuck, when buying a property?
Legal issues when buying a property.
You're an attorney, so let us.
Yeah, well, what I tell people is what I tell most people, and you see it most of the time in a sheriff's sale, because even if you order the title report, you are in essence, you're bidding blind unless you did not adhere to the letter of the law and you let yourself into a vacant property, which you're not supposed to do. Now, I'm not going to say that it might not happen. So you don't know what the inside of the house looks like. So, so some legal issues with buying houses blind. I mean, tenants have rights, and you buy a property in Polk County and you put it into a corporate entity, and there's let's call them a renter. You're going to say they're a squatter. They're going to say, well, last person let me live here, I'm a renter. The city of Des Moines is not fond of that. They're not big fans of that, and they could pursue you for the unauthorized, allowing of a tenant in there. So some of the things when you're buying a house blind, sheriff's sale is really the biggest one where it's tough to protect yourself, insulate yourself completely legally to the myriad of things that you could be stepping into.
Okay, and if it's not a sure sale, then what would you tell us to watch out for?
Most of the time you protect yourself. I mean, you want to protect yourself on the title. So have an attorney do the title opinion. Have the attorney handle the closing so all the liens get paid, taxes get handled right. And so, there's not really a whole lot legally to insulate yourself from. I mean, on the subject too, like we discussed, you could have a seller with regrets, and once their lien paid off for whatever reason, that then the stuff that they can do. I tell everybody, when you get in situations, it's always easier to try to work it out. Litigation costs are ridiculous. I've incurred them. Other people have incurred them. I mean,
we spent over 6 figures on a principal issue.
And I found myself doing it too. And I look back in hindsight and I'm like, how the hell did I waste $70,000 on an attorney just out of spite? Because I knew I was in the right. But you do. I mean, it's just, and so, yeah, I mean, it's hard to envision the legal issues that you could step into, but yeah, I mean, I just.
You say the number one thing is hire an attorney to do the closing for you to make sure that all the payments and all the tax payments and other things and liens get taken care of.
I would recommend it. I mean, it's a pretty, on a cash deal, we charge $200. The nominal fees that transactional real estate attorneys, $175 for your title opinion. So for $300, $400 on the buyer's side, you're protected on title and closing. And that to me is the biggest risk. I mean, yeah, an abstractor can miss something. It does happen. Attorneys can miss something in the abstract. It happens. It doesn't happen with a lot of regularity. And again, most stuff that you step into, I mean, I guess one thing that I touch upon though, and, Mitch doing a lot of tax deed stuff, you got to be careful buying a tax sale.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a special process.
There is a special process, and now tax deeds used to be able to void a tax deed just by blowing air on them. It was crazy, but it's a lot better now with the 120-day affidavit. But one thing you got to keep in mind is most tax deed holders, when they sell, they want to do quitclaim deeds, so they don't want to do an abstract rebuild.
Bet what you're willing to lose. That's what I remind folks.
It's exactly right. So as a buyer,
bet what you're willing to lose. That's how I look at tax deeds. Even when we buy certificates and that stuff, it's a gamble. Like Chuck said earlier, we've bet more on football games sometimes. So it is what it is.
Yeah, if you're buying a property for $15,000 from a tax deed holder, are you going to spend $2,000 in abstract title and closing? Probably not. You're rolling the dice on $10,000, $15,000. If you're buying a $100,000 property, yeah, you probably want to spend the $2,000 and spend the money yourself as the buyer to recreate the abstract and pay an attorney to look at that title, because if they didn't do something right in the tax sale, which happens, sometimes it just happens from oversight.
Changed this stuff before. I mean, it happens. Yeah.
Well, and the two areas that you have to understand where you see things missed the most are in foreclosures and tax sales. And a lot of reason for that is when the initial search is done for either the foreclosure attorney or the tax sale purchaser, consider the type of seller that is losing that property, right? They're not paying their mortgage or their taxes. Well, they're probably not paying their credit card companies. They probably have judgments out the wazoo. They might have a bankruptcy. So they may have tax liens, federal, state. So the search itself, and then if they have a variation on their name, like they go by Rick, but really their name's Richard. And, the next person that does the search as an abstractor searches more variations in the name, and suddenly you find judgments that the prior person didn't find. You got to clear them. It's your property, So some of it, that's where you see the greatest issues arise after you acquire an asset is sheriff sales and buying from tax deed holders. And you can insulate yourself as best as possible, but stuff still comes up. I mean, I'm still seeing new situations after. I mean, I've closed thousands of deals. I bought a lot of properties. I still, I still step in it from time to time myself, and I'm an attorney. You insulate yourself. As Mitch says, don't bet more than you're willing to lose. And you try to insulate yourself from the risk at what you're willing to pay for the insulation.
Yep.
Hey, Chuck, kind of a question or more of a clarification. I don't know everybody in the group here, but I'm sure there's some people that are maybe newer to real estate. And if you can explain the different ways, I guess more so on the wholesaling side, as far as you can, when you're selling your contract or whatever, as far as like in the assignment process or the double close process or the blind/dry double close process.
Yeah, so I mean, I know my buddy Mitch loves the dry double closing, and
I have my opinions. I have my opinions.
Here's what I'll say to the new investor. Be careful what you're advertising that you're selling, okay? Make sure you don't market a property until you actually sign an agreement and have an interest in the property, or you're acting as a realtor. I mean, you just are if you don't have an interest in real estate. Now, the flip side of that is under Iowa law, the minute a purchase agreement is signed, it's an executory contract, and the buyer has equitable title at that point. Now, it's not recorded. Purchase agreements usually aren't. Sometimes they are to protect interest. So you have, again, race notice, so you haven't completed the race part of it by getting it filed and giving notice. But legally, you are the equitable title holder of that property. And with that, you're afforded all the luxury that the title holder has. So you can advertise that property, you can market it, show it, try to sell it. You're selling your interest in the property. When the closing occurs, whether it's the assignment fee or the double closing, and you make the difference, make sure that that's structured so that is compensation for your interest in the property. I get leery when I see some wholesalers start talking about bird dog fees. I mean, bird dog fees are realtor commissions. I mean, it is what it is. You can't collect those unless you're a licensed realtor. If you sign the purchase agreement, understand, you're selling your ownership interest in that real estate. It's not a bird dog fee. You're not marketing it for somebody. You're marketing for yourself. Make sure you make that stuff clear and stuff you put out there. You'll run afoul of the real estate commission. I mean, you cannot market somebody's property for them unless you're a licensed realtor in the state of Iowa. It's black letter law. And then, on the back end, how it works, if either do the assignment, which then involves basically the assignee steps into the original purchaser's shoes on the original purchase agreement and agrees to pay that individual a fee at closing for that assignment of their interest. And there's one closing, and that fee is paid on the HUD or closing statement. So make sure you're comfortable with a seller seeing that, because it's out there for everybody to see. Or you do the double closing, and where you have two separate closings, two separate closing statements. Your savvy seller will find out, if they look online, they can tell exactly what you sold the property for and what you profited. It's all publicly available information, and most of them aren't ever going to look. But, I always go into this, I always tell wholesalers that bring me deals, I mean, I don't care how much you make on a deal. I really don't. I evaluate a deal based on what I can make on the deal, not what you're making. But, on the double closing, then you can either have transactional funding, or you can do what's a dry closing, where you use the end funds to pay the front end deal. Now, some attorneys in town don't do them. And I think that's based on a misunderstanding of an attorney went to jail for not for doing double closings, but he was doing them on short sales, and he was signing affidavits saying that he was unaware of a second transaction, and then he was closing the second transaction and drafting the deeds for the second transaction. And, so you cannot make under oath representations to lenders that they rely upon, because at that point you're committing mortgage fraud. And I think the ethics opinion that was written about him did not completely understand that it wasn't the nature that there were two closings occurring. It was the fact he was representing to the lender there wasn't going to be two closings occurring. And that's what he went to jail for. So in my opinion, it's no different than if you have somebody who buys a house on contract, they're 10 years into their contract, they stick a for sale sign in the front yard and they sell it. The law doesn't require that contract buyer to pay off their contract before they can sell their house to an end buyer. It's a simultaneous double closing. I mean, legally, purchase agreements are the same. They're executory contracts, just like 30-year amortized real estate contracts. So in my opinion, legally, there is absolutely no difference from those transactions. But the one situation has a little bit of, distaste by attorneys because I think the way the ethics opinion was written. And here's the other problem you have as investors. And this, you probably never, maybe you've had your real estate attorney tell you this, maybe you haven't. There are right now on the entire bench in the Polk County, Iowa Court of Appeals, and the Iowa Supreme Court, there is exactly one judge with real estate experience. And he worked in a trust department at a bank. There are 0 real estate attorneys currently sitting on the Court of Appeals. There are 0 real estate attorneys sitting on the Iowa Supreme Court. I lost a case once with 100 years of case law on my side and common sense on my side, and a judge in Buena Vista ruled against me. And I thought the other attorney should have been sanctioned for even raising the argument, because so if you ever get into a dispute, if you ever have an attorney utter the sentence to you, you can't lose, get a different attorney, because you can lose. So
I can echo that very loudly.
Yeah,
All the way to appeal. And we're like, common sense, guys. What in the actual hell? So
yeah,
what Chuck is saying there, try to work it out before you go there. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so the double closings, there's nothing illegal about them, in my opinion. There's nothing, like I said, some attorneys won't do them. And those attorneys typically try to steer the A seller with the C buyer to execute a new purchase agreement and just cut B completely out of the equation. And, I do stuff like that. So that's when if you're doing wholesale deals and you're shopping for attorneys, I mean, that's a question for the attorney. One of the things on the outline, how to find real estate attorneys. I mean, ask people in this group, ask people that invest, and then ask other real estate attorneys. I mean, I'll tell you who all the real estate attorneys are. And I've sat through a lot of interviews with new prospective clients. I'm always shocked. I've never been asked the question of what I don't do well. And to me, would be like the most important question that I would ask an attorney when I sat down across from them, because that's really what you want to know. I mean, we can all talk about what we do great. But yeah, so, reach out, ask
I like
around.
that, Chuck.
What's that?
I said I like that. I like that a lot. I never even thought of that.
No
Hey,
one's
Chuck,
ever asked me that before.
Chuck, what don't you do well?
I ask myself that all the time, but I never ask that of anyone else for some reason. I don't.
Well, I think it would show, I'll tell you what I don't do well. I mean, if you want an attorney that gets back to you within seconds of an email, or even the same day, or even sometimes I hate to say it, the next day, I mean, I'm busy, I'm buried. I try to put off emails and telephone calls till the weekend. I give a lot of clients my cell phone. If it's an emergency or you need an immediate answer, text me or call me. But I mean, I don't babysit clients. And I don't, so I mean, that to me is probably the biggest thing I don't do well. Some clients like the immediate access to an attorney, and but you flip on the side of that. What I always say, what I offer my clients is I can think outside the box. I've bought real estate for a long time. I always like the scene in Pulp Fiction. You know, I'm the wolf. I'm here to help. I'm here to fix the problem. I'm like the wolf. I try to think outside the box, like, well, how the heck can we get this deal closed with all these things in our way? And most attorneys don't think like that. They give you the title opinion, and then you got it. Well, how can we get these things out of it? Well, I don't know. You know, I mean, most attorneys, you know, most real estate attorneys, you need a title opinion and closing. They're great. And, you know, anybody can do that. But can they help you get a deal closed and put money in your pocket that you otherwise wouldn't have got done? To me, that's the two things I'd look for in an attorney is honesty and the ability to help you make money.
Yeah. Those objections are the key point, Chuck. I agree with that. Can you help navigate through real estate objections? Because you're going to run into them, especially if you're in that wholesale or subject to market. Really, you're going to run into title objections. If you're doing traditional on the MLS type real estate transactions, you're going to run into a lot less of them, but you're still going to run into them.
Absolutely. And, you know, that's like I give you an example. I had a guy coming in here. He had this file, and the deal was going to completely bomb over a $3,500 judgment. And I started looking at the $3,500 judgment, and it was 9 years and 7 months old. And I'm like, what are you going to do with this property? He said, well, I'm going to use it as a rental. I said, well, close on the property. I'm like, this judgment falls off in 5 months. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, it's only good for 10 years. And he's just looking at me like, you know, well, this other attorney that did the title, you know, opinion didn't tell me that. And I'm like, well, I mean, the other attorney doesn't buy really. He's not looking for, he's looking to do a title opinion and collect a fee. He's not looking to help you get the deal closed. I mean, that's just the reality of it.
Yeah, and Chuck, I'm going to endorse you heavy here real quick. So I've used Chuck for a handful of transactions, and they have always been super complicated headaches. So I really appreciate Chuck working through those objections. I mean, hell, we've got one right now that we can't track down a dead brother from several years ago. It's an entertaining, it's entertaining to say the least.
But Mitch would also, you know, assure you too that I don't get back to him in a prompt manner either.
It happens.
I try.
Yeah, you try. It's all right, buddy. Hey, at least you know and call out the weaknesses, right?
Well, it is what it is. I mean, that's why I'm always shocked that nobody has ever asked me the question. I mean, I would always that would be one of the first questions I'd ask an attorney. I actually in an interview once. Well, I'd be babbling, keep everyone's time. But I interviewed a big firm up in Minneapolis. I thought I wanted to move back that area out of law school. And so I asked the attorney, what's it like? Is it good working here? What's the work environment? It's a lot of fun. And picture the guy across the table from me interviewing me was, you know, the newest partner of the firm. He was the hiring partner. He had just gotten the bonus. He had all the reasons to say something great about his firm, right? Teed it up on a, you know, ready to go. And we're up on we were up on like the 60th or 70th floor of one of those buildings downtown. And he looks away from me and he looks out the conference window at the big expanse. And there's like a uncomfortable 30-second pause. And he turns his head back to me and he said, well, I can say it has its days. And I got down to my car and I called him back on my the old flip phone, and I was like, you can remove my name from consideration. I don't want to work here. But yeah, so I mean, that's something you should, you know, to me, I'd ask any attorney, what don't you do well? I mean, every attorney can tell you all day long what we do great.
I love it. That's fantastic advice, Chuck. Thank you for that.
We have your contact info. Is your contact info posted to the meetup page somewhere, Chuck?
It is. It's on the agenda. Website's on there. Facebook's on there. Phone number's on there. But Chuck, if you would tell them how to get a hold of you.
Yeah. So office number is 222-9900. Honestly, the easiest way to get something back from me is my emails. If I'm buried in the middle of projects, I try to reply to all my emails every weekend. My email address is just Chuck at the letters C and then my last name, Hendricks, law.com. So basically Chuck at hendrickslaw.com. And that's by far the quickest rate of response. I have people walk in the office too, and if I'm not busy, I don't mind walk-ins. I'll sit and talk. If you got problem files or just looking for something, a different thought. I mean, that's, or if you got deals, we buy real estate too. So
For sure. And Chuck, are you in the Facebook group right now?
am not.
Okay, we'll get you in there for sure.
Yeah.
Great way to connect that way. Both with deals and up and coming wholesalers, bird dogs, etc. So
Yeah, and as Mitch can testify, most of my clients can testify. I don't usually charge for my time, so if you're asking me a legal question, I'm on the phone with you 15 minutes to a half hour. I don't bill you. I really look at my function for my clients as I make money when you guys make money. That's how I've always looked at it. Whenever since I got into real estate, I make my money when you guys make your money, and I've kind of lived by that. That was how Matt Kern kind of brought me in at Wasker, and and you don't make money if the deal don't close. So I don't make money if the deal don't close. So let's get them closed.
Hey, Chuck, do you do any work on multifamily too, or only single residential?
In what capacity? Buy or?
Yeah.
Yeah, I own 3 duplexes. We just inked a purchase agreement on a 4-plex. So yeah, when I say there isn't anything we won't look at, there isn't anything we won't look at. So
Okay. Well, multifamily, it's really larger than 4 units.
well, yeah, we don't. I mean, we've looked at the bigger stuff, but honestly, the bigger stuff is just my assessment. And I have a really good friend who's a commercial appraiser. The unit cost on the big stuff in Des Moines doesn't make sense to him, and it don't make sense to me. When I can go buy a house and get more rent than a per unit on a huge, so I've never gotten into it. I mean, we look at them. We look at them, but the per unit, usually when the per unit cost makes sense, that's sold before I see it.
Yeah.
And when it doesn't make sense,
caps running out there that I'm like, I don't understand.
Exactly. And it's a lot of investors that are paying wacky numbers on the coast that are willing to pay a little less wacky number in the Midwest, but it's still a wacky number when I look at it. So
Okay. What was that, Mitch?
We've been seeing 6 caps. So literal, I had a conversation with appraisers and followed up with a lender. Appraisal came back in the 6% range, I think it was 6.8, but still 6 cap. We're got a 6 in front, and that is
small.
scary.
Yeah.
And what's like the dollar amount per unit that you're usually looking at for like apartment complex? Like, what is your standard?
So Des Moines standard is around 55,000, but that gets skewed very quickly depending on size of unit. So 1, 2, 3 beds, but that's the average, right? So you start looking at 3 and 4 bedrooms; those are going to be substantially more than 55,000. You start looking at 1 bedrooms and efficiencies; they should tank down a little bit. Of
but
course,
they
it also
don't.
depends on grade. Yeah. What was that, Chuck?
I said, but they don't. That's what I'm saying. The 1 bedroom inefficiencies on a per unit basis that you see on the deals around this town, this doesn't make sense to me. But somebody's buying them, not me.
Yep.
Okay, so Chuck, so it sounds like what you're saying is you have worked with, if I'm misunderstanding, you have worked with multifamilies, you just don't like them from the ROI point of view.
Correct. Yeah, I've represented complexes and some of real estate law within that is a whole different area of niches that attorneys have. I try not to handle landlord-tenant disputes. It to me is a lot like divorce law. It sucks the life out of me, honestly, and it's bad enough I have to deal with my own tenants. But yeah, I've represented. I've done closings on larger, not just multi-unit deals, but large land deals. Michael's Landing out there. handled the closing years back when it came out of the foreclosure for the company out of Minneapolis that took a bunch of that down. But yeah, so I mean, in my history of my practice, yeah, I've represented about every type of real estate client you can represent. My primary practice is in the, practice side has gravitated towards, really 4-unit and under title and closing. And that's just kind of where my practice has evolved. But
transactionally, from a closing standpoint, they're very similar though, correct, Chuck?
Yeah, there really isn't a lot of difference. I mean, and this is where, a lot of advice to my clients, particularly landlords, whether they're going to buy a few units, which is crazy in my opinion, or you're going to just jump in and buy the big units. A lot of the stuff you can't afford to pay an attorney to do it. So, your due diligence on your front end, your estoppels, letters, your, confirmations on, rents and what's owed and what's, I mean, a lot of the due diligence stuff on the front end that, I tell my clients, here's the stuff you need to do to safeguard your stuff, but you want to go out and do that legwork. You don't want to pay me to go do that stuff. And then the same, on the sales side and what to look out for. So, yeah, I mean, I've done it. I've represented people. I have, basic knowledge of most things with the law, but it's just like if you came to me to represent you on, say, a tax sale deed, I'd tell you I'm not your attorney. I know tax sale law. I could do it, but I don't have every form that you would ever need. I mean, I've got the typical form, 120-day affidavit, stuff like that I do for clients, but I'd recommend you go to somebody else. I'd have no problem saying, Jim Nervig knows more about tax, has forgotten more about tax law than I'll ever know. I mean, why would I tell you to come to me when Jim Nervig's more knowledgeable? If you have a foreclosure case, I'd tell you go down Matt Laughlin at Davis Law Firm. I mean, that he's nails as a foreclosure attorney. But yeah, I can muck through a foreclosure for you and do it, but I'll tell you point blank, I'm not your guy. It's not in my wheelhouse. You have
transactional for some of the other guys, whereas it would be a one-off for you. Is that a good way to analyze that?
Yeah, and just to put it on a personal level, I mean, I outsource my foreclosures to Laughlin myself. I mean, I just, there's just some stuff that, but again, it's the level. I've always found that the attorneys that do the widest range of stuff do so because they haven't. It's not a knock on them, they haven't developed the client base to keep themselves busy and make enough money in the smaller area that, and I've been practicing so long that, but again, I know attorneys that won't tell their clients that because they're so fearful that if you go have an experience with another attorney, you're going to lose you. Well, if I don't provide you good enough customer service on the other stuff, then I should lose you. I mean, it's the way business works. So I got no problem telling people you're better suited or referring to a different attorney on a specific issue. And to me, it's looking out for the client.
And that's a really good takeaway there, guys, is there is a specialization that's happening inside of real estate. And a real estate attorney doesn't do everything in all of real estate. And I want to be really clear about that. That's what Chuck's articulating for us. Tax sales are someone else. Mortgage or foreclosures are someone else. It's not that he can't do them. It's just that there's other folks out there that are more specialized. Don't go, and we use this on a personal level as well. We have different attorneys for different processes and different buckets. Like my business advisor, totally different. Chuck, have we ever talked about like business structuring?
No.
No, exactly. So that's what it comes down to. We haven't talked about business structuring. We haven't talked about well, I won't go into that. Never mind. Litigation or anything like that. Those are different folks. And the tenant landlord law, I would, yeah. I mean, I don't. I think we heard Chuck say that he doesn't want to do those, but those don't DIY them. Especially your first time. Do not DIY that. Exactly. Experience.
That's what I tell people too. I'm like, if you want to pay me a premium to walk you through your first foreclosure or first eviction and show you everything that you need to do, and you want to pay me a premium for it, I will teach you with that first one. But you can't, at some point, if you're going to be a landlord, you cannot pay an attorney to do evictions. It's just, the process is so convoluted. You sit down at the damn courthouse for an hour waiting till you're called. I mean, and then you
show up.
Or then you go in the mediation room when they do show up, and if they have legal aid with them, they've got 10 motions and that they're filing. And I mean, it's just, you have to learn. If you're going to want to be a landlord, you have to learn it. Your ROI drops to nothing if you're paying an attorney out the nose to handle routine transactional stuff like evictions. But I do offer people the opportunity that if you want to ride shotgun, I'll show you the forms. I mean, the small claims court has all the forms. But in a lot of ways, Mitch, if you do try to do an eviction yourself and you step in it a few times, there's something to be said for learning that way too. I mean,
Right.
It might take you a little longer, but you learn really quick.
You learn through action. We do all of our own evictions from the property management side as well. But those first few, and when those motions come up, or those requests for translators or whatever,
Right.
It's like, we need a second opinion before we file anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. But definitely though, like the action component of that is important, and there's a handful of folks in town that are more than happy to keep collecting those fees and never have that conversation. So the level of transparency you provided us, Chuck, is phenomenal. Thank you for that.
Anytime, man.
Well, we are way over time for Chuck, so I want to wrap this up, guys. Chuck, is there anything we should have asked you and didn't?
Great question.
Who do you recommend as a good real estate attorney?
Well, again, it depends what you're doing. I mean, that's, title and closing, it's the same names. It's me, it's Hubbard, it's Wasker, it's, Mitch, Lisa. I mean, there's.
I've used everyone in town. Like literally, guys, I've used everyone in town. I will tell you, Chuck, Hubbard, and Wilson are the three that we consistently recommend. So there was one excluded from that, but there's, yeah.
Well, yeah, and honestly, Wasker's niche is the title and closing with a mortgage lender. I mean, that's their bread and butter, and that's what they do really well. Now they can do other title and closings. I'm not saying they can't, but that's their bread and butter. That's, if you're a mortgage broker and you're asking me who in town, I'm gonna close 20 loans a month, who should I use? I'd be like, well, Wasker. They got closers stacked on closers over there. I mean, why wouldn't you? But yeah, investor, and you want somebody that is approachable to that seller that's going to come in, and you don't want them to feel like a pressure sale is happening at the used car lot. There's other attorneys that have a little more relaxed style to them when they're handling your closing. That's, just, it is what it is.
For sure. Well, thanks again, Chuck. Really appreciate you coming on here, brother. I think you added a ton of value to the group tonight, so that's amazing, and thank you for that. Guys, make sure you reach out to Chuck. Let's get some business going his way. I know you're busy, Chuck, but we're still going to push it your way, buddy.
I appreciate that.
If you guys aren't plugged in, next week is the official kickoff of the book club. So we're doing the Go Giver. This week's assignment was read those chapters and then live it for a week. So if you're not plugged in that, feel free to drop us an email either through Meetup or just jump in the Facebook group. It's posted as an announcement in there. We've got some podcasts coming out, so we're scheduled to be on a handful of shows. So I'll get those guys Facebook Live into here. Got a special surprise in relation to that book club coming up. So if you're in there, awesome, you're going to get that. If you're not in there, you're going to miss the opportunity. So make sure you jump in there. Really encourage engagement inside of that book club. And then last but not least, we are looking towards figuring out some kind of impromptu coaching of some sort. Have no idea what that looks like, but we want to start getting some of the information out there to everyone on how to get started, take those first next steps. Good way to get plugged in with that is we are doing weekly luncheons. So jump into that Facebook group, check us out, come join us. Seats are limited to 6 external attendees at those luncheons. They're all over Des Moines, so different areas around the city, trying to get some business to those local restaurants to keep them open as much as possible over that lunch hour. So definitely get plugged into those guys if you are not.